What's going on, guys? It is Friday, August 18th. You're listening to the Daily AI Show live. Welcome. So today, as you can see, some of us knew it was Aloha Friday, and some of us didn't. And I don't want to point out who did or who didn't know it was Aloha Friday.
You don't want to point them out?
Yeah. I don't want to. And for any of our listeners that might be on Spotify guessing, I'm just going to give you it's me and Beth. Me and Beth didn't know it was Aloha Friday. So we got a great crew here today. Aaron's not in here today. Carl might be joining us. And today we're talking all about APIs. And we're going to start with the basics, and we're going to ratchet up from there to wherever we can take it. So I'm going to step out of this because I know, Jumi, you said, hey, I'll take this one. I can get this started. And then if you want, I did ask ChatGPT for like a 5-year-old level of explaining APIs, but actually it was a pretty cool example with robots. So let me know if I can throw that in there at any time.
Gotcha. Okay, so quick overview for everyone who doesn't understand. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. All it is a set of protocols set up for a particular application so that a third party or outside user can access whatever service tool that application is for. So whenever you access ChatGPT, it's actually accessing its own API. Whenever you're accessing using like Zapier or Make to create an automation, you are telling it what APIs, what integrations with your other services that you're trying to access, whether that be Google Docs or Microsoft or anything like that. That's pretty much what an API is there for. It's to expand, make their application more extensible, so that people can integrate and automate and use their application on a base level, something that runs in the back end. So to make it a little more seamless.
Right. And I think to add on to that, it's basically good for if you have two SaaS products, two software as a service products that you use in your organization, and you'd love for them to work together. You'd love for them to talk and the data to be shared. And when something happens over here, something happens over here. That's what APIs are for. And companies like Zapier and Make are basically the grand central station of all that data. So Zapier will go out to one, get it what it needs, and go out to the other, get what it needs, and kind of make them talk together, make them work together. It's really a brilliant software. So in the context of this conversation, if anybody wants to say more about APIs, go for it. We really want to kind of get everybody's thoughts and talk to the audience about how AI is playing into that. So we have the typical players. We have OpenAI, we have Anthropic, we have Cohere, we have AI Twin Labs, have the open source network. And so these are all language models that the API is going out and accessing their product or their basic technology. Okay, so you can make an API call to those products, get an answer, bring it back, and then shove it into some other software product that you have. And so when you have that level of complexity and that level of integration, it's really on you to figure out the use case. Really, you have the tool. You have a hammer. Now you got to find a nail. What do y'all think?
Yeah, that I agree. That's exactly what you're trying to do. I think it just comes down to making your applications work with each other and making it doing it at a fully integrated level, so that it all just runs seamlessly, hopefully, in the background. So that whatever the user experience is for your application, whether you are a B2C company or a B2C tool or program, you want to make sure that your customer, the client, has no doesn't look behind the curtain, right? So you just want that flawless experience, and that's what APIs do for you. Is it allows you to expand the amount of power and access and information you have for any application that you build.
So does anybody here have any experience, actually specific cases that they're working on now that I could talk about mine, but I was curious before I start talking if anybody's using some APIs with AI to do some projects right now.
So one of the first times I needed it was for GPT for work, which before Code Interpreter came out, and now that it's out, it's still pretty useful. It integrates with Google Sheets and makes calls directly to OpenAI's GPT technology. And that's when I learned, like, okay, so how do I generate this? GPT for Work walked you right through it, right? There are little screenshots. And that was super useful. Like the big explanation sounds kind of complicated, but you don't even need to know what is happening behind the scenes. You should totally know what's happening behind the scenes, but you don't need to in order to generate the API and stick it in the box that says, put your API here and then use it.
Yeah, I love that point. You don't have to know what's going on behind the scenes. I love that because this is not a coding tool. This is used by coders, but honestly, this is a no-code solution. Sorry, Brian, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, right, I was just agreeing with Beth. That's kind of where I've been using it at this point. I've used it in like GPT for Sheets, which we're using in our current boot camps that I'm helping with. I'm using it in things like LangFlow, which is like a LangChain tool that allows you to have like a no-code, low-code solution as well. So again, though, for me, it's mainly been popping in those API keys, which I think it's worth just saying too. You got to be really careful if it hasn't already been said. Sorry, Jimmy, you were talking at the beginning, so if I missed it, I apologize. But you got to be careful with your API keys because you have to keep those private. You have to make sure that you're not sharing videos. If you're sharing with somebody else, that API key is not on the screen, because somebody else can quickly take that API key and use it and then run up a huge bill on you. You also have to be careful with making sure that you don't have like some open-ended script going on, because I think we were talking about the other day with somebody got charged $17,000 because their API key was, whatever they were running didn't have a cease on it or cease and desist on it or some endpoint after so many iterations. And so it kept running and actually ran up a huge bill, which, I mean, at the prices that it cost, which is like 6 cents per 750 words, I think on GPT-4 through the API, like $17,000 is like, that's impressive. not great for that person, but impressive to run up that kind of bill. So I just wanted to put that out there. Like, that's kind of where my use cases have been. Obviously Zapier. I haven't messed with Make as much. I know we're going to be talking about those next week as well, but Zapier for sure. And then anywhere else, I mean, I think at this point, if I went in and looked on the backside of OpenAI, I probably have 15 different generated API keys. So probably about that many use cases that I've personally used. So not much, but anyway, and welcome, Carl, by the way.
Yeah. Hey, I want to talk about APIs and integrating multiple elements of a system stack within a company. So in your company, if you're working in a business right now, your development team is using APIs all the time to accomplish integrations between pieces of software as a service, SaaS, that are being purchased and subscribed by your company, but they have to use API documentation for each one of them and determine what endpoints they want to weave together in order to have each of these independently developed systems talk to each other. So it's a lingua franca of computer integrations across the web.
Andy, pause right there. Explain endpoints for me.
Yeah. So when I build a feature server and I want to offer a service on the web, I have to publish my endpoints. And I might say, okay, if you want to query my service and figure out what, an order number is, then the endpoint for order information is this, and it gives you a string of characters that you have to address with your computer code in order to do that. So let me jump over and say, for individual users, we probably never, unless we were in the development team, we never really engaged with APIs. But now, in the no-code or low-code environment, we're talking about APIs because there's other services that have been provided that allow us, like Zapier and Make, to exploit those endpoints. And there's an endpoint that's been published by Slack. There's an endpoint that's been published by Google for their Sheets applications and so on. And now you can use like drag and drop workflow management systems like LangChain and LangFlow. And there's other companies that are coming out that operate really as API switchers. So now you can address an API with OpenAPI, OpenAI. I'm sorry, it is like OpenAPI as well. It's really using APIs to do that. So you can address that as a single endpoint, but you can also do a series of steps to create an application that exploits multiple services out there on the web and weaves them all together. So that's really the power, is when you start to build something together like that. And I'm familiar with a few of the chatbot building systems that allow you to basically turn a dial and say, okay, I express this prompt to OpenAI, but what happens if I switch it over to Claude? Now, I've already uploaded my API key for OpenAI and for Claude, and all I have to do is change the endpoint. And now it's going to give me a response from Claude rather than from OpenAI. Mm-hmm. So that kind of switching is what these new low-code environment services are providing to you, so you can use APIs.
Nice.
That's really interesting, and that leads me to a part of this conversation I think we should jump to, which is agents and function calls. So you've probably heard the term agents, and I think what Andy is kind of alluding to a little bit about that, what his last few comments was, agents allow you to use APIs to create certain specialist API calls. So let's say you're in an environment and actually OpenAI has the ability for you to do function calls. I want the weather. Okay, that's a very basic thing. But let's say you're doing a large prompt, but you want one specific thing to be very accurate. So you'll do a function call. You'll do an API specific for the weather, or you'll do specific for a statistic or a math equation solution. And so what you're doing is you're basically sending APIs out to do these specific function calls, or maybe in the LangChain environment, you're doing specific agents that solve those problems. So you're stacking all of these up to have a much better solution. Now, that's a little bit generic. Does anybody have experience with that so they can explain it more in detail?
I want to just add a connotation of agent, which is, the large language models have reasoning capability, and they can look at an objective and decide what information needs to be collected. And they also have a list of all the open endpoints that are out there that might provide that information. And so an agent can actually design, an AI agent can design the sequence of steps that we described in such a thing as Langflow, or just, an API workflow sequence, and do it for you. And that's getting really to the point of no code, where I can just say, hey, to my LLM, I want this to happen, and it knows how to go out and establish those API connections, go out, does it, like literally does it, and then can actually turn around and publish things to the web as well, to a web page and so on.
And that's, and those who don't know, LangChain, Langflow are like a Grand Central Station as well for those different agents. So you're able to pull those different specialist agents together to create that product. So that's what you would use. Carl, what do you have to add to the conversation?
So just to, I guess, expand on Andy's point, where, I've been using Flowise Langflow to build a couple of different, or, test different applications. And I think at this point, from an agent perspective, I don't know all of your experience, but they're still not functioning, I would say 100% of the time. We're talking like 60, 50% of the time. There's a lot of like stalling from what I've been trying to either build out or test. But I think from an API perspective too, one thing I wanted to, I guess, touch on would be, we're all dependent on that provider. And are we confident in, maybe playing a devil's advocate, are we confident that whoever provides that API, and most of us use the OpenAI API, but like we're all subject to OpenAI's rules of use, and that's kind of like, everything we build is based on their rules, and right. So
And also, if you build a product with the API and they change something, now your product is crap,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you're in trouble. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's kind of point, maybe not exactly a danger because, they're one of the biggest providers, but just you see how many AI apps are out there built on OpenAI's API, right? We've seen the news sort, the article that says, oh, GPT is.
He froze. Okay.
Okay.
I want
to add to what he was saying, which is it's their business model, right? That's the way they make their huge sums of money.
Yeah.
You can go and work on Chat GPT
Sure.
with 3.5 Turbo right now for free if you type everything in through the web, UI, like you're in a browser. But if you want to do something that's more automated and exploits the speed of computing, then you're going to use the API, and they charge you for every character basically that flows through that API. And that's where we get these dramatic $17,000 a month bills. And they're even larger bills. I mean, I've heard these things about, just even operating, OpenAI costs something like, $7 million a week or something.
$700,000 a day. I think what I heard.
For all of that compute power, and it's done through monitoring each individual API key owner's transaction flow through their system, and they charge that user for it.
Yeah, I saw a headline that OpenAI was looking to become bankrupt soon. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I do want to give an analogy real quick. So, like, let's say you're a restaurant owner and you buy chicken from a supplier or lettuce, and then all of your customers get salmonella poisoning or some kind of terrible poisoning because of that product. Then who's liable? Like, they're going to see the restaurant owner is, oh, I went to that restaurant, I got this salmonella poisoning. This is the same thing with OpenAI. If you build a product that uses that API and they change something and your product is shit, pardon my French, then they don't look at OpenAI. They look at you. So be aware of building products.
The end user. Yeah, and I wanted to just sort of so I'm going to play like sort of because you guys you're doing a wonderful job explaining this, but I want to make sure I'm bringing this back to sort of like basic level because that's where I kind of feel like I am sometimes with OpenAI. Doing the same thing. APIs doesn't have to be OpenAI. It's too many of the same letters in there. But one of the things you were saying, kind of, Carl, and I think Andy, you were also saying is that in like July of this year, they opened up GPT-4 to general use through the API, and then they said, "Oh, this is OpenAI." Said over time, as you would imagine, we will. I think they call it depreciate, or they will get rid of. They'll have an end date for older models, whether that's GPT-3 or 3.5 or 3.5 Turbo eventually and things like this. And then eventually 4 will go away in time. So now we have all these plugins, all these products that have been created that call to this API. And I'm sure that if I understand it right, that company has the choice to switch models. But it could be that when you switch, even though 4, we would all generally say is better, the outputs are better, it could actually break the product. I think, Robert, you're kind of saying that it could create actually whatever that plugin or that end user experience is, whether it's a chatbot on a website or whatever, to actually turn out to be worse. And some of that is like what Rachel always talks about with like prompt drift, right? And in terms of like what you do today may not still be as effective or efficient tomorrow. It may not produce the same quality results. So I understand.
I was actually playing around with the Python code for 3.5 and 4. I was, I'm not a coder. I just like to play around with it. But when they launched GP4's API, the parameters are all different. So if you set your code up with certain parameters like weight and I forgot the other ones that they call them. Temperature. Yeah. They use different terms. For GPT-4, it completely shifted. And so now you're not properly tuning your model because it has different parameters. So you're going to have your coders go back into if it's sophisticated, every one of your API calls are going to have to be adjusted. It's just something to be aware of. So which is good for the longevity of those who are providing AI ops, AI consultancy. It gives you much better, which is what we do at WSI, is being able to allow you an opportunity to continue to be useful to your client. It's like, well, I have to be there if something breaks to fix it for you, you know?
Yeah, and I want to be clear that this concept is nothing new to software development.
Oh, no.
Okay. So yeah, depreciation of a product going from one to another. Everyone can knows that we can't. Windows 7 is not updated anymore, right? And Microsoft's trying to get you to Windows 11, and so in a few years, Windows 10 won't be available anymore. So this is a natural process of software development. It, you know, just has to deal with the cost of maintaining, plus their interests of putting the new features in the new system and all those kinds of things. But I just wanted to make it clear that these kinds of things you're going to have to deal with in any form of software development. So even if you use a open source solution, you're going to, as that evolves, as any of these systems evolve or these software evolves, you're going to have to adapt. So now I will agree that open source is probably going to be a better for longevity, and you have more direct control of what you're doing as opposed to relying on a single source or having that single point of failure. But it is a natural part of the software development process.
So let me ask this because, yeah, sorry, Beth. I was just going to say real quick. We know the big companies. We hear those in the news, right? The APIs. So Microsoft, obviously, they invested billions into OpenAI in 2019, and they've continued to do so. So they're in bed with them. Salesforce, even though Salesforce, right, Beth, has Einstein GPT, they are also have agreements with the OpenAI, and they're using that APIs. BuzzFeed, Shutterstock, we've heard about that one. We were just talking about that I think yesterday when we were talking about Midjourney. So we hear these big companies too, and I guess I'm curious how you guys see how, let's say, mid-sized companies, not the Microsoft. If you're a company with 50 or less employees, how are you currently going to use the APIs? Is it probably just API keys at this point? Is it probably in these agents like you were mentioning, Andy, where it's going to be like a Langflow, or maybe even something simpler like a Zapier or a Make, where it's kind of just no code given to you in front of you? Or do you see that there's some of these like companies are going to be going into like Node.js and doing their own thing in Python?
I think it depends on the complexity of the use case and the solution that they're trying to achieve, right? And when it comes to AI integration, it's all about what problem are you trying to solve? What bottleneck are you addressing? It's just no different than any other technologies, rearing its ugly head trying to fix a problem that, humans with sticks and rocks couldn't do, right? Like, like the old 2001 kind of thing. So my point is that when it comes to integrating into a company, I think some with 50 or more will just use off-the-shelf products, and then some with 50 or less will be using very complex, fixing a certain problem they couldn't fix with humans. I know several friends, business owners, that are like, "Hey, Robert, can you help me with this?" Like, well, that's quite complex. Like his POS system doesn't give him the export that he needs of the data he wants. So he owns a beer store called the Casual Pint, and it's like, I want the data to tell me whenever the beer gets low in the kegs to notify me of the type of beer I need to order. Like, it sounds so simple, right? But the POS doesn't give it to him. The ordering system doesn't give it to him. His inventory manager doesn't give it to him. So how do we make all those pieces work? And that seems kind of complex, and so I think that some small business owners will have complex API needs, and you just, quite frankly, hire one of us or go onto Fiverr and find somebody that can actually make that happen is the way of the world right now. I think it's so awesome to be able to get that technology to answer the questions that you're needing for your business. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've talked about is that AI really amplifies human ability, but it does not amplify human experience. So what Junmi was talking about, like, hey, if you've been in software development, this is a thing. But I can now develop software without that experience. I don't have the history, like the cultural knowledge. I just have these little drag and drop no code tools, and they're amazing. But there are pieces that are missing in that skill set or tech stack.
Yeah, it goes back to what we've been saying all along, which is that, I think we were just saying it yesterday with Midjourney. But I know this has been a common theme. It's going to be a common theme of the Daily AI Show, is just that now more people than ever have the ability to do these low code solutions or be able to do things with things like ChatGPT that we would have never thought possible. But there's still a spot for the experts, because whether you're a photographer who understands light and aperture, like we were talking about yesterday for Midjourney and how that works, or Junmi, you've got coders who can go in there and say like, yeah, you can go and build that no code solution with that API, but it will only get you so far, and you're not going to know what to do with it past this point. You're going to need an expert in there. And what are you going to do next month when they get rid of this model and update that model? To your point, like, who's going to go in and make those adjustments to make sure your product or your service doesn't fall down, And so, I don't know, Carl, I wanted to throw it back to you real quick as we're sort of wrapping up, because, I feel like probably you and Robert and maybe Jimmy, you guys have been building, Andy too, actually, I guess you guys have all been building more complex stuff. Like, Carl, for what you've been doing with clients, is there like sort of a common theme for you as far as API? I know you've been saying like maybe the lang flows aren't quite there, maybe the chatbots aren't quite there. Is there anything that you feel like is baked enough at this point that businesses should be looking at?
It all depends on the specific business still. Just echoing Robert's point, where what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And specifically for the niche that I'm looking at, which is kind of the non-tech, more traditional established groups, where they only know what they know. And I think right now the biggest opportunities are probably the ones where Zapier make really simple things that they can connect their systems to, whether it's quote unquote as complex as Salesforce, or something even simpler as Google Sheets or Excel. Just that simple, using Google Sheets, using OpenAI's API to help with accounting, is a huge benefit for countless companies who don't even know what they can do with that. So that's sort of where I'm finding the easiest place to start, rather than trying to go up to things like agents, where I find when you explain those type of concepts, it's like it goes right over their heads. But if I explain, hey, you know what, we can reduce your time to do reporting by 30-40% just using Sheets, OpenAI API, it's like the ROI is like, oh, you can? Perfect. Like it's such a simple connection, right?
I love that. I mean, just to reiterate what you said, and then I know, Robert, you got a use case for us to wrap things up, but to reiterate what you were just saying, Carl, I love this idea, what you were just saying, or how I heard it was, it doesn't have to be complex. There's certainly complex solutions out there. There's the Microsofts, the BuzzFeeds, the Shutterstocks, and so on and so forth. And they probably have lots of very, very smart people spending lots of money building very complex things. But for the general user, to your point, go find one thing that you could possibly automate or get help with and start at the basics. And that you may find more ROI on something very, very simple, the level of the keg or whatever the case is for that particular user, that makes a massive impact for them. That's not necessarily complex and doesn't need to be. So I just wanted to reiterate that because I thought it was such a great point. Robert, what do you got?
That is 2023's AI 101. Is ever since January, it's just do a little something for your role. Just use ChatGPT just to make one thing that you're doing at your business and your company and your role, make it a little bit more efficient. And then you just said again, Brian, we 6 months later, just use one API call just to make your job. You're constantly don't try to boil the ocean is the term. Just take a little thimble of water and boil that. And so one use case I think I came across yesterday, and it's not mine, so I can't own it. Another colleague from the AI Exchange, I was having a conversation with him yesterday, and he was telling me somebody he knew, which was a brilliant programmer, come up with this. So he's got a client that is constantly reviewing, what do you call it, venture capital, opportunities, and they needed a way to scan the documents of all the information and understand, okay, what are the names of the owners, what is their different factors, right? Now you can upload a document one at a time and say, who are the owners? And it would probably pull it out. But he wanted to do it in scale, like, they do hundreds of these, so he was able to create an API function call. And this is what, I guess, going back to function calls, who would specifically go out and find the names. That's all it was responsible for. So it was able to scan documents at scale as part of a larger API or a product. So the product wasn't just finding the names; it was many other things. It would, but that one particular API was designed to say, I want you to go out and find the names. And so I think that is a very specific, very small use case that was bundled inside a much larger product. It gives you some insight as to how this particular technology can be utilized for use cases. Anyway, that was just one thought. Hopefully that was clear.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so I think, as we start to kind of take it out here, this is a really good conversation. I think it's a great way to end, which is now, Aloha Friday, as it is now. Jumi has dubbed it, and we will all follow along. I will make sure I have a shirt ready. But have a great weekend, everybody. This has been a wonderful week. Can't wait to get back and talk to you guys on Monday with lots more AI topics. This has been the Daily AI Show live, and we will see you next week, guys.
Bye,
See ya.
everybody.